higher ed space. So when you know that, Harvard and Babson or BU, and et cetera, are working with MPOWER, then for Northeastern, it's easier to say, yes, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so that problem quickly went away. The students flooded our website. There was clearly a need in this space, and that's not hard to imagine. I mean, there's today 1.75 million international students in the US and Canada alone. And those are the ones who make it. There's millions who would love the chance to study in North America at a top school, at any school in some cases. And so we could multiply the market by 10x just by enabling them financially to come over.
Yeah.
So there's the opportunity is there. And, over the past 8 years, we're able to demonstrate that just through sheer growth. The loan capital and the capital in general, I think, was the toughest part. Being based in DC, I think, didn't help. I think to some extent, had I been based in the Silicon Valley, maybe things would have been a little different. Also, I think investors had seen sort of the lending clubs, sort of like V1s of these lend tech companies, and in some cases had gotten burned a little bit by it. Like it's not like lending club went away, but it, as you know, it sort of like went up and then it went down pretty poorly. And I think that affected a lot of these VCs who were hesitant to sort of put money in what they saw as like maybe a lending club V2. And it wasn't always easy either for us to demonstrate how we were different from, say, like a SoFi or Common Bond, et cetera. But it came over time. I think people realized the uniqueness of the asset, how it behaved during COVID actually helped us as well. So we were able to show that whereas a lot of regular sort of student lenders were seeing high rates of forbearances or delinquencies, in our case, the international students were sort of holding like fast and steady in terms of loan repayment performance during that time. And I think that rang a light bulb inside the head of a lot of asset managers and credit funds in the US who are like, you know what, this is exactly what I need to sort of like diversify from my existing portfolio, or just, add to it and enhance my returns, because we're, essentially we became a credit fund's wet dream in that we are returning much higher returns than what they would get regularly on the market, and the volatility was less. I had a French dinner table. I'm originally from France. I spent most of my childhood there through high school. And so, around the dinner table were my parents, although my dad was often traveling, and my 3 siblings. And then, I remember a lot of soups. My mom used to make a lot of vegetable soups. So that's what I remember, soups and salad. Doesn't get more French than that in a way.
Yeah. I was just going to say, is that common, for French families to that's kind of the main staples?
I think so. My mom was maybe more health conscious than most, so I feel like she gave us a good nutritional education, which I've done a really poor job following in the years after that. But I gotta say, was raised on soups and salads.
Yeah. And what did your dad do? You said he's not around as much. Was he more of an entrepreneurial type position, or
later in life? He worked in the packaging industry out of all places, and so he was sort of a GM, and then before that, sort of a marketing executive in packaging. So I think like really exciting things like cardboard or plastic packaging for industrial goods, like your cereal box from a Nestle brand in Europe and things like that. So he had a career doing that, and then he became an entrepreneur at a similar time as me in a way, maybe a few years earlier, in boating equipment. He was very passionate about the sea. We're very alike and very different in many ways. I can't be caught dead on a boat. I get seasick very easily, and he's been on boats since being a young kid. So it's kind of fun. He's fascinated by the sea.
Yeah. Interesting. So what was the catalyst that got you into entrepreneurialism? What was kind of your first dipping of your toe in, or I guess just the impetus of wanting to hang your own shingle and start your own company?
So I'm an accidental entrepreneur. So I never even dreamed of being an entrepreneur in any way. So it was almost like a religious calling. So I had a fairly boring sort of, or more linear sort of career path. Yeah, I started. I was at Capital One as a business analyst, and then moved on and was an operations analyst for a tech company in Boston. Got an MBA at INSEAD in Europe. Joined McKinsey. So had fun there, doing financial services work around the planet. Worked in sub-Saharan Africa. Went to
Oh, wow.
Brazil for some work. So it was really exciting, really fun, and I was having a great time there. And then in early 2014, a student reached out to me, a student from my alma mater. I went to UVA, University of Virginia, and he reached out to me and a few other alumni, and he said the following. He said, "Hey guys, I'm $500 short on my rent this month. I'm going to get evicted, and I'm thinking about dropping out of school." And that really shook me. At McKinsey, I was doing financial services work, but really financial inclusion work. I was doing mobile money in Nigeria. I was doing sort of mass market banking in the US. So there was a sort of impact angle to what I was doing. And the students' experience, in addition to being sort of like squarely in my field, also resonated personally. So one thing about me is 23 years ago, when I went to school at UVA, I struggled financially through school. I did fine academically, but I took a bunch of odd jobs to get through school. And thankfully, my parents sacrificed a lot to get me through it. And so I had that experience, and then the experience repeated itself when about a decade later, my younger sister came to the US and did essentially had faced the same challenge. She got into schools, but she was struggling financially through it. And so as big brother, I was able to help. But same thing, if I wasn't there, how would she have paid for her education?
Yeah.
So anyway, so when the student Nick reached out about 8 years ago, it sort of like brought me to a halt. I thought, wow, shit, this really resonates. And this keeps being sort of a theme in my life. And why aren't banks doing anything? And then I thought, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And then I thought, why am I not doing anything about this? Like the writing couldn't be any more on the wall. And I, being the good little management consultant I decided to analyze the market a little bit and understand more about it, and realized it was not just a good impact opportunity, it was a great financial opportunity. And in a way, I felt like I didn't have a choice. Like my heart was really calling me in that direction. And so I jumped ahead with 2 feet, left my cushy job at McKinsey. And initially, I didn't really have a clue what entrepreneurship was about or what I needed to do. I just knew I needed to find a solution to this. And so I partnered with a serial entrepreneur friend of mine from business school, Mike Davis. And the two of us went at it. And here we are now, 8 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. And what were some of those initial things that you guys, sort of focused in on? You saw this need, right? And then you brought someone else in, which was really smart. Someone who else, you said was a serial entrepreneur. So we've done this a few times before. It sounds like. What were some of your initial things that you were looking at? Did you at this point you had already quit your job, like you said, jumped in with both feet? Was there things that you were unsure of or needed to figure out, or taking those first steps? What were those first initial steps that you guys decided to take? Because I think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with, right? They are probably in some type of a stable position, but there's something else calling to them, some other opportunity that they see. But they're not quite sure, is this right? Am I in the right position? Do I have the right answers? And, my answer to that is there's never a right time. You just kind of have to jump in and figure it out. But I'm curious what your thoughts were as you were going through that. What were some of those initial things that you were, sort of focused on to set up?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. It is a bit of there's always an element of a leap of faith in it, right? You can't control the macro environment. You can't control things you don't know, et cetera. So there are things I think that we did that I'm happy we did in retrospect. One is, as Mike and I embarked on this, we wrote out what we wanted to achieve in the first 180 days. So we said, okay, in 6 months, we got to have, and I forget the exact numbers, but it was like X number of schools signed up to work with us, Y dollars in revenue, Z numbers of students that we were able to finance. And then there was, so essentially some some OKRs or some KPIs, and then some goals alongside this. We had to had built like an initial some kind of initial platform and so on. And so we went at it, and after 6 months, we didn't tick the box on all of those, but as we reviewed it, we were like, yeah, we got close enough that there's something here, and let's go on. Mike, until that point, had not quit his job full time, and I, until that point, still had sort of open job offers to go elsewhere and take more of a corporate job if I needed. The door at McKinsey was still open, and so. We had minimized the risk that way. We had some level of savings on our bank accounts, et cetera. So we had hedged as much as we could. So even though I said I went in 2 feet forward, we weren't necessarily crazy or completely reckless in our approach either. We had some kind of downside risk mitigation in place. And so that's what we did. And it was really exciting.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. And so you have a couple of different players, like you said, you identify those different people, and those are completely different industries. You've got some type of a funding source there. You've got the schools, you've got the students. Which one was the most difficult to, acquire and get on board, in those initial days, would you say? Because I feel like it's sort of like a chicken and egg, a 3-way chicken and egg type problem, right? You can't have one without the others. And
that's right. It was a 3-sided marketplace, and it always had, and through our journey, there's always one of those 3 always becomes a bottleneck, right? And initially we had challenges across all 3. We had zero credibility with schools, right? We were 2 guys in a pitch deck, and get a free intern that we brought on board. And so, I tried cold emailing schools like Harvard, et cetera, just to show how naive I was. And, they not only did they not do anything with us, they didn't even respond. They're like, who is this sort of nobody? Schools, for the fun fact, are entities that are really thinking in sort of hundreds of years, or at least decades, right? They've been here for 150, 200 years, and they intend to be there for the next 150 to 200. So they don't affiliate very quickly with sort of an early stage startup. So that was a challenge. The students were slightly less of a challenge, but again, the students who came to us in that first year had to be absolutely desperate for funding, because the website was sort of designed by yours truly, which is to say, like, it was horrendous looking. It would probably give you zero confidence that you're borrowing from this entity. Like, online,
am I going to have to sell a liver for this or what? What is that?
Yes, it's pretty much like it's either this or giving away a kidney. So they definitely took a chance on us, even though we're lending money. So it's not as big of a risk as investing or anything like that. It was still, like who the hell are these guys? Wait, and a lot of them came on my LinkedIn page or Mike Davis's LinkedIn page, just to make sure we were real people and we weren't too shady. So that was a mild challenge, but somewhat surmountable. The funding was tough, right? I think, especially nowadays, it's getting, I think, a bit easier and easier. We've done at least our little part to try to democratize this idea that, like, hey, we need immigrants in general, but high skilled labor even more so. These are incredibly valuable to the US educational system, to the US economy, et cetera. 8 years ago, this was, it wasn't novel, but I think it wasn't as accepted. The number of international students was less. And so convincing investors, both on the equity side and on the loan capital side, that, somehow me as a first-time entrepreneur and my person co-founder were going to, like, crack this space, had figured out an algorithm to lend to these students in a way that was going to get our money back, that the market was big enough, et cetera. It was a very real challenge.
Yeah, I'm sure. And with the school side of things, you mentioned that it was really difficult to get into them. And again, this is something, just like all entrepreneurs struggle with this in the first place. How do you get in and get your first customers? What did you find was finally kind of the breaking point that allowed you to be able to reach and connect to the right, the right people? Was there, a certain campaign or something like that? And you don't have to go into the specifics of the campaign, but what was ultimately what, kind of cracked open the door to be able to, get those initial schools on board, or school on board even?
So it's probably 20% persistence and 80% luck. We got Harvard as our first partner.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, which is great, and which really gave us a lot of credibility afterwards. But how we got Harvard as a first partner was in itself a huge amount of luck, and probably like a story over beers at one point. But from there, it made things easier because they gave us immediate credibility. It allowed us also to have a few more loans of great quality on our balance sheet, and have a few sort of stories and cases we could then tell other schools. And even with that, it was still a challenge to add other schools. And so we hired a head of sales. And what's interesting is Mike and I, when we went to speak with the university relations, with the financial aid offices or even admissions early on, we didn't look the part. We didn't dress like we were dressed like Wall Street. That was sort of our backgrounds were in financial services, and it just didn't click as much with sort of the academia, financial aid, sort of back office, and the cultures didn't gel, and it was just like we were doomed from the start. And so we hired someone who was from that background, and who would be able to say, hey, Mary Lou, like, remember me, like we went to the same sort of financial aid conference in Puerto Rico like 8 years ago, etc. And that immediately opened the door for us. And then from there we were able to say, well, we help international students who you can't fund today for your school, and you probably have someone in the past week that came to your office crying because they couldn't pay their tuition for this semester or the next one. And so, it gave us the opportunity to at least pitch to these universities, and gave us the first foot in the door, and then we were able to close essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was critical. So essentially, failing and then asking for help is the lesson there.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So I'm just curious, how your presentation has changed now, especially after hiring that. Hiring that person that sort of made you, or gave you the foot in the door. And again, I think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with, is like you said, you didn't fit the part. You weren't, you felt like you were going in impressing people. And I kind of picture you guys, walking in like a 3-piece suit and all dressed up, and they're they maybe are there like in just a regular sweater or t-shirt, so walking into situations like that, I've had people tell me, like, you can't sell unless you're in a suit, right? Like that's part of it. I guess it depends on what the market is. I'm personally a t-shirt kind of guy. I'd rather walk in and be the guy that kind of stands out from everybody else, and is the one that knows his stuff, but doesn't necessarily seem so uptight and stuffy, where everybody else kind of walks in and they all look the same and you can't pick them out anyway. So I'm just curious, has your approach changed, and does that resonate with you, sort of standing out on your own, differently from what maybe, I don't know if you have many competitors at this point, but just basically standing out to identify, resonate with people a little bit more on their own level, through dress, through body language, all of that, rather than trying to dress to impress, in that position. Does that make sense?
It does. How we evolved, and I think I've evolved as a person a lot. Also, I think there were some insecurities at the time. And not that like everything's gone or changed, I'm always working on myself, but I think now, over the past few years, and COVID to some extent has helped. I think I and a lot of people have learned to bring really themselves authentically to work, right? We've seen people with their babies at home coming in, in the middle of like a Zoom meeting, etc. Right. And I like that. It's sort of like it got rid of all sort of the corporate like facade or BS. And, we essentially, even though it was through Zoom, people ended up meeting as humans. versus as employees before. And so I that helped catalyze it. But for me, I think I had started to go down that path in the years at MPOWER. So over the past 8 years, I feel like more and more, I dropped the suit, relaxed a little bit, felt more comfortable just being myself, and maybe a bit more jokingly than I was in the initial stages. I got comfortable, I guess, is what you could say.
And there's an element of confidence with all of that as well. So that's probably the core. The core element is that you're confident enough to be comfortable and be yourself and present that. And I completely agree. I mean, obviously there's a point in your life where you're trying to impress everyone. And then at a certain point, it's like, okay, it is what it is at this point. So, so what were some of the later challenges, with scaling all of this that you ran into? You've gotten in your foot in the door with a couple of people or a couple of different schools. Did you run into any major hurdles or anything like that, building it out, would you say? Or is it pretty well just sort of rinse and repeat, school after school?
Oh, we cruised over the past 8 years. No,
Yeah.
I'm teasing. No, yes. I don't think any entrepreneur ever says that, or if they do, I really want to meet them and ask them how they do it. No, it was the schools became after, I would say, the initial dozen or so. So the first one was by far the hardest, right? And then after that, once we got that university relations director on board, he really helped us with the next sort of dozen, and then 30. And then after it was really, after that, it was sort of a domino effect. There's a bit of a herd mentality and sort of comfort in numbers in the higher ed space. So when that Harvard and Babson or BU and et cetera are working with MPOWER, then for Northeastern it's easier to say yes, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so that problem quickly went away. The students flooded our website. There was clearly a need in this space, and that's not hard to imagine. I mean, there's today 1.75 million international students in the US and Canada alone. And those are the ones who make it. There's millions who would love the chance to study in North America at a top school, at any school in some cases. And so we could multiply the market by 10x just by enabling them financially to come over.
Yeah.
So there's the opportunity is there. And, over the past 8 years, we're able to demonstrate that just through sheer growth. The loan capital and the capital in general, I think, was the toughest part. Being based in DC, I think, didn't help. I think to some extent, had I been based in the Silicon Valley, maybe things would have been a little different. Also, I think investors had seen sort of the lending clubs, sort of like V1s of these lend tech companies, and in some cases had gotten burned a little bit by it. Like it's not like lending club went away, but it, as you know, it sort of like went up and then it went down pretty poorly. And I think that affected a lot of these VCs who were hesitant to sort of put money in what they saw as like maybe a lending club V2. And it wasn't always easy either for us to demonstrate how we were different from, say, like a SoFi or Common Bond, et cetera. But it came over time. I think people realized the uniqueness of the asset, how it behaved during COVID actually helped us as well. So we were able to show that whereas a lot of regular sort of student lenders were seeing high rates of forbearances or delinquencies, in our case, the international students were sort of holding like fast and steady in terms of loan repayment performance during that time. And I think that rang a light bulb inside the head of a lot of asset managers and credit funds in the US who are like, you know what, this is exactly what I need to sort of like diversify from my existing portfolio, or just, add to it and enhance my returns, because we're, essentially we became a credit fund's wet dream in that we are returning much higher returns than what they would get regularly on the market, and the volatility was less.
Yeah, interesting.
So we became entrenched as a financial product.
Did you find out why the international students had a lower rate of default than what the call them domestic students had? Was there a reason for that?
A little bit. There's a few factors at play, and I wouldn't be able to tell you it's 70% because of this and 30% because of that, but I'll share a few things. So one is 50% of all international students in North America are coming in at the graduate level. And we know that graduate students already have a lower default rate than undergrads. And I don't know what the exact breakdown is for American students, but it's probably like 80 or 90% undergrad and then the rest grad. So there's a huge element there. 70 to 80% of international students to North America are going to the top 400 or so universities. So really high concentration in good brand name schools. Not all of them have a great return on investment, but most of them do. And they have a brand that supports them with career placement, et cetera. So that's another plus. And then the other aspect is a huge percentage, 80%, for instance, of Indian students are coming to the US for degrees in STEM, right? So computer science, mechanical engineering, biology, mathematics, you name it. And those have a really high placement rate and really good salaries after graduation. They're also a good indication of sort of the level of discipline, diligence, and comfort with numbers that these students have. So not only is it sort of, it showcases the capacity to pay for the students, it's also a really good indicator of their willingness to pay, or at least of their financial literacy. So those are factors that help us. And I think it's important to take a step back and realize that, like, yes, even though it's almost 2 million international students in the US and Canada, it's 2 million of 6+ billion people around the planet. And it's really the cream of the crop that makes it here.
Yeah.
Oftentimes their parents may not be rich in sort of dollars, but they're often fairly educated in the home country, and they're able to support, during tough times and so on. And so there's a certain sort of financial fluency, financial comfort that some of these students come from. And then there's a certain amount of like positive signaling that's coming from the fact that they're willing to like leave everything behind, travel halfway across the planet to invest in themselves and in education.
Yeah.
Whereas for American students, some of them, they never questioned whether or not they would go to college. It was sort of like the next step in the process.
Yeah.
It wasn't as much of like a battlefield to make it here. And I don't want to generalize, like for a lot of students, sadly, in the US, it still very much is that like a battlefield and a huge achievement if they make it to college. And oftentimes they're the first in their family to do so. But for international students, it's you have all this plus the financial challenge, plus you're adding in immigration challenges, cultural challenges, and the personal risk of leaving family and friends and culture behind.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. You mentioned sort of in the middle of that, the students are going to these, name brand schools. I'm curious if you ever considered, because basically the way that I'm kind of looking at this is, you basically signed pretty well the name brand school right off the bat, right? Were you guys, I guess, focused on, let's go for the biggest, the best first, and then we'll allow that to sort of matriculate down onto the other schools, and we've got Harvard, so everybody else, if we've got Harvard, everybody else will fall in line. So really, really difficult to be able to get them. Maybe it would have been easier to get some of the smaller schools first and then, move your way up. I'm just curious, your thought process between, or, spending time on, the 800-pound gorilla versus, maybe taking out some of the smaller players first. You could have gotten to them maybe easier. Was there any thought process into, what direction you should go and why you chose going that direction?
I would love to take credit for like a well planned out strategy that was like, let's get the 800-pound gorilla and then move from there. In reality, it was a little bit of a fluke. It was, like I said, it was 80% chance. We had a spray and pray strategy, and through just like a really interesting set of circumstances, we managed to get in front of Harvard and made a compelling case at a time when they really needed this for one of the new programs they were creating. And then through some internal Harvard policy, because they were listing us at one part of the campus, they had to list us across the rest of the campus.
Okay.
So it's just like I said, it was just an interesting set of coincidences that led us to be listed there as a preferred lender early on. But yeah, I think we couldn't have asked for a better partner.
Yeah,
Just
right.
about,
Yeah.
and I wish I could, claim like, yes, this was totally thought out. It really wasn't. It was really just like, please, we're really trying to get this off the ground. Like
Yeah.
anyone will do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that story. There's obviously so many chance happenings that everybody sort of, stumbles across, throughout their process. Is there anything that you would say that you ran into that you wish you had done differently? Any learnings, sort of looking back, like, this was something that, we could have approached this way or that way? Anything stand out of curiosity?
There's a lot of learning along the way. I think I'm not even sure where to start in recruiting. I think it, well, there's a lot also on the personal level. I wish I'd worked at a startup or growth company before
Mhm.
starting my own. I think everything was new to me versus I feel like if I had worked even at an established one like a Netflix or whatever, I would have picked up on sort of the ups and downs of the startup world, et cetera, and without you know me being in charge of payroll and the direction of the company and everything in a sort of like less emotionally involved way. And
Mhm.
and maybe that would have just decreased my stress levels in the early years, or given me some more best practices to look at. So on the personal level, I would say I wish I'd done that. So maybe guidance for maybe more junior listeners. The other thing that jumps to mind is on the recruiting front. I think on that same line of thought, we hired a lot of fairly senior corporate people initially,
Mhm.
and they're really nice and really bright, but I think they really struggled with sort of the nimble roll up your sleeves, get things done quickly
Mhm.
sort of mantra, especially in a place like DC, which is very by design sort of compliance and legal focused. And not that those two can't go together. I think we pride ourselves in actually being not a break everything type of startup, but actually like work well within the
Mhm.
regulatory frameworks and make regulation your friend. Um, but still, we hired some corporate profiles who I think were great people, but really struggled. And so I think what we put in place later on is a huge advantage in our sort of recruiting scorecard is to have startup or growth company experience,
Okay.
because that person knows how to, presumably if they've done well at a previous shop, they know how to get results done quickly. They know how to deal with uncertainty,
Mhm.
with the ups and downs and the fast pace of a growth company, which is a very different skill set than sort of the having a team of like 3,000 people under you, and setting more strategy, et cetera. There's not a whole lot of strategy, I think, in a growth company. Like the strategy is me and maybe a board member and one or two other members of the executive team, and even then it's very simple, like grow, right? And so
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
if you have product market fit, it's just like grow. There's no like, hey, should we acquire this other company, should we move to Western Europe, like that's not really much of a concern. And so anyway, how do you find people that can really just focus on growth and execution?
Yeah. And that last word there, execution. I'm curious your um your thoughts on this. So I think what a lot of um new companies do is there's a lot of focus on a lot of different things, right? So, or I should say there's energy spent in a lot of different areas, which basically equates to not much execution. So you might, touch on this, and now we need this, and we're over here, and oh, now this is the most important thing. What are your thoughts on, I guess, um, identifying what needs to be done, and how do you identify, what needs to be done? What is the most important thing? What is the best thing to spend my time on versus, the mentality of let's get things done and um, like you said, grow is the most important thing, but what lever are you going to pull, or what thing is the thing we need to do right now to make sure that we do grow, and, make sure that we have enough focus on whatever that is, and not letting other things sort of distract us before we get whatever those results are that we're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, right? So that there's a notion of possibilities, and then there's always sort of several levers we have for growth, and we could be shooting in many different directions. How do we decide sort of where to focus our attention? I think there's two. There's sort of the how do we figure out, and then how do we enforce it? The how do we figure out is from very early on. We copied best practices from Capital One, Vistaprint, McKinsey, and other sort of
Mhm.
very sort of
Your
quant
background.
heavy. Yeah, in my background, but also very sort of analytical and quant heavy companies
Yeah.
where you sort of measure everything. It's also fairly flat in that data trumps experience or expertise. So, the entry level associate, if she or he has the data to support something, will trump whatever the VP thinks is a good idea.
Hmm.
And so we put in place massive sort of infrastructure early on for access to data, and we made sure we measured everything. And that was true in HR. It was certainly true for our customer funnel, our partners, and so on. And so and then we hired accordingly, right? There's no poets at Empower. Like everyone has to have a certain level of sort of both digital fluency, but also analytical fluency,
Hmm.
because that's how we make the decisions and that's how we decide where to focus on. And so um, that helps us identify, okay, well, do we invest more in digital marketing? Do we partner with more schools? Do we expand to another country? And do we double down on this partnership? So that's how we make those decisions. Now, how do we enforce it? Focus, to your earlier point, is the key. So we push everyone, and I drink my own Kool-Aid on this one, or that's not the American
Yeah, I
expression.
think that's it. Yeah, I drink
I
the
take my
Kool-Aid.
own medicine,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I drink.
So
Yeah, I drink my own Kool-Aid. Yeah, I think so.
so
It
on this
works.
one, we we'll say it works. I always use like American idioms in the wrong way, so it's usually funny to a lot of my colleagues. But what we do is we set pretty clear goals, not just on a yearly basis or quarterly basis, but even weekly. Everyone at the company, fills out what are the sort of like 5 to 8 things they want to get done on a Trello
Mhm.
board on a weekly basis. And every day, as teams, usually units of no more than 7 or 8 people, we go through it as a group, and then we check out at the end of the day. And these are sort of
Mhm.
like the top 3 things I was able to do. And so there's sort of a system of accountability that allows us, not only to commit to these 3 things, but also to stay focused on these, because
Mhm.
otherwise, a few things happen. One, we get distracted and end up sort of shooting in all directions. 2, we shoot in different directions for different people, and then or 3. We get burned out, right? And people end up working till midnight or 3 in the morning because they want to do 17 things,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
which maybe a dozen don't matter as much.
Yep. Yeah. No, exactly. And I'm curious. Have you ever read the 4 Disciplines of Execution by chance?
I have not, but that sounds
Oh,
like something I should
fantastic.
read.
It's exactly what you just described. We're basically, I just stumbled across this actually from another conversation that I had on another one of another episode of the podcast. But real brief explanation. Essentially, you have your whirlwind that's always going on. That's something that all of that stuff all needs to get done. But they have a process that allows you to basically identify these are the things that we should be working on, and it's up to the the staff member, the employee, to consciously make an effort to make sure that they spend the time to get whatever those things are done, and still have the whirlwind going on behind them. So just really fascinating way to be able to break that apart. But it's exactly what you're describing there, where you have your weekly meetings. I'm Matt. I committed last week to getting this done. This is what I got done. This was a challenge. Or maybe I committed to getting this done, but I got this and this done. So just exact same thing you guys are doing. And I just was curious because it sounds exactly like that. But yeah, 4 Disciplines of Execution, really good book, good framework in there to anybody who's interested in that exact same philosophy. Great way to be able to sort of execute that. So read 4 Disciplines of Execution to execute. So at any rate, yeah, no, really interesting stuff. I love talking founding companies and growing companies and all of the trials and tribulations that you run into. And you guys seem like you have done a great job navigating all of that, and put your systems in place to be able to make sure that everyone's, rowing in the right direction and, moving in the same direction. If people, anywhere across your spectrum of clients, or maybe even someone who's interested in reaching out to you personally, what would be the best way to learn more, reach out, get in touch? What would be the direction you would send them?
Sure. I think it depends what for exactly. I think if they want to learn more about if they're student international or DACA or American student, even they can find out about us on our website, www.empowerfinancing.com. Empower is essentially MPOWER, so without the first E. And they can find out about our loans, our scholarships, our social impact, who we are as a team and a culture, etc. If they want to get in touch with me, I think LinkedIn is the best way. I have one or two maybe Medium articles that I published, but LinkedIn is probably the easiest. Manu Smadja, or Emmanuel Smadja, I think is my full name on LinkedIn. And then otherwise we try to push out content on Twitter, even Instagram or Facebook, etc. Lots of job openings in case people are interested in working.
Oh,
We have
excellent.
offices in DC and Bangalore. Hopefully, I think I've covered most of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what types of positions are you hiring for right now?
Everything. We're in hyper growth mode, so we have over 100 openings right
Wow.
now in DC and Bangalore, and we even have some sort of location flexibility beyond that if people are not excited about relocating. We, as every single company on the planet at this point, we're really looking for tech talent. And there's really a global war on tech talent at this point. So if you're an engineer, a data analyst, QA, any technical sort of role, we probably need your skill set and would love to speak with you. And again, you can go on our career site to see what's available. But we're looking for a broad spectrum. So even if you're not, if you don't have a technical background, we probably need your skill set in other areas.
Yeah, love that, love that. And what is it like? I'm curious, from your perspective, managing a company that, what is your current total employee list right now? And obviously you said you're looking for a substantial number more, but what is it like running a company with that many people at this point? What any learnings there with again scaling and sort of setting in place those managerial goals, I guess you can say, for people that are might have a specific focus, which kind of gets back to the execution part that we just talked about a few minutes ago. But any tips there as far as scaling and growing and managing large numbers of people?
So we're more than 100 people today, which is a long way from two co-founders and an intern 8 years back. And like I said, growing quickly, so we'll double the size of our global team again this year. Tips for management. I think what can happen, especially if you grow quickly, there's a few risks. One is, are you democratizing sort of access to data and decision making quick enough, right? Or are you still sort of concentrating on everything in the founder or in the C-suite, in which case you can bring the organization at a standstill. And then the other danger that can happen is you grow so quickly that you lose your culture as a company. And so those are two things, at least that were on our radar early on, and that we've tried to mitigate as much as possible. So to my earlier example around democratizing data and putting a lot of data infrastructure in place, not only does it help sort of level the playing field between the entry-level analyst and the VP, but it actually also helps onboard people a lot faster, and also democratizes sort of decision making in general, right? So I don't have to be the decider of all things at Empower, neither does the C-suite. Like, people can look at the data, and we have the frameworks in place to quickly allow them to make financial decision, investment decisions, development or testing decisions on their own. So that's one thing we pushed hard on and put in place a lot of these frameworks in the past years. And then on the culture side, we are how to put it, ruthless about hiring people that fit the mission. That's one thing I'll never sacrifice or compromise on, is we hire people who are passionate about making an impact. And it doesn't have to be sort of like they've always been in the sort of like student loan financing or education sector, right? They're just passionate about making an impact in other human beings, in the lives of other human beings. And so they might have worked in the health tech sector, they might have worked for an NGO at some point, they might have been tutoring students for ESL in their free time, but they have demonstrated commitment to essentially empowering others. And we found that that dedication to impact, that mission focus in folks, helps us achieve a couple of things. One, it really binds everyone together. It's sort of that shared sense of mission we all have. And it also translates into more collaboration within the company. I think it's hard to hire people who are extremely caring about others from a customer standpoint, but are somehow assholes to their colleagues. Like those two don't go together. Usually they're good people externally and internally. And so that's helped us essentially, even in a hyper growth mode, stay true to who we are as a company culture.
Yeah, I love it. Great philosophy, great approach there. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you start getting a few assholes in the company, you know, it certainly shows itself pretty quickly, but you know, it can certainly, you know, turn the waters muddy, another American name or saying there for you, but it gets pretty convoluted pretty quickly. So yeah, great advice there. Manu, this has been fantastic. I certainly appreciate the time, and congrats on all the success. You guys have done some amazing things over the years, and thanks for sharing it with us.
Thanks so much, Matt. This was great fun. Time flies when you're having fun. So I appreciate you having me on this show, and stay in touch.
Absolutely.